Yeah, I don't know if you were talking because I could not hear you at all. It was like
No.
a silent movie on the intro.
Oh no. Mm-mm.
You're muted.
I.
Nope,
Well,
nothing. Okay, so
no.
what she said in the beginning, hi, welcome to the show. She said something along the lines of, and I'm being a little psychic here. Hello, creepy crawlies. Lauren is a goddess that I
Mm.
love with all of my heart, and Magda
Mhm.
is butter on a hot tortilla. That's what I'm thinking, she said.
Sounds about right.
So
Eh?
if you can't tell, we're having all sorts of technical issues. Geek
Mm.
Gumshoe he's trying to get on the show, but he's not here yet. Oh,
Aye. There we are. Oh, lovely. Ah,
can we
what's that
get a
day?
hi or
Hello?
something? I want to make sure we
Oh,
can
I'm
hear
sorry. I
you.
didn't realize y'all had popped me
Oh,
on there.
fabulous. With
Did
sound.
DL drop back
It's
Surprise.
out?
good. It's
Okay,
that
well,
day.
yeah, right. It's that day. It has been that episode from the beginning of trying to get this together.
This has been
Mhm.
an absolute circus trying to make this show happen this week, and I'm just happy to be here, especially with
Aye.
Snowmageddon 24 going on outside right
Oh,
now.
what?
Aye.
Yeah, Right,
Well,
there she's back, and she's gone and back.
Okay, but can you hear?
I
Aye.
can hear you,
Yeah.
kind of, but your screen is frozen now.
Mm.
Like
Yeah,
outside, it's frozen.
I might have to jump off because I mean, yeah, I'm having all kinds of
Mhm.
technical issues.
You can just be here in sound. Everybody will be fine with that.
Okay, all right. But I do know that I have been told that I have been lagging. But so if there's something going on, and I get laggy, just let me know. Crap.
We have
Ah.
Eli saying, and Eli is drop dead sexy.
Yes, that was also in the intro that DL said silently. Where we're
Of
psychic. You know,
course,
you're
of
part of
course.
the hive mind, Eli, and you knew it.
Mhm.
All right. So while we have Geek Gumshoe here, can you tell us a little bit of hi, who are you? What's going on? How'd you get here?
Well, I am a retired police detective. I retired about 2 years ago after 26 years in law enforcement, 16 years of which I was a detective, working every manner of case from mailbox vandalisms to homicides. I specialized in digital forensics, doing cell phones and computers, and spent several years working in a national organization called the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. I also spent 4 years on a task force with the Secret Service doing fraud investigations, identity theft, counterfeiting, and dignitary protection.
Nice. All right. DL, can we
Cool.
get a test? We got a
Can
cool.
can we? I don't. Are we okay?
I think
Aye.
we're a little
But
laggy,
I'm
but I think
lagging.
we're good.
Okay.
I think we can.
I'll
work
just
with
try to
it.
be quiet as possible.
That's cute.
DL's going to try to keep her mouth shut.
Mhm.
Good luck.
Quite a trick.
All right. While we have, yep, there we go. Take it
We
back.
have our usual disclaimer, which is warning. This show may contain strong language or disturbing topics, which may be unsuitable for children, and unusual humor, which may be unsuitable for adults.
Likely.
As you know, if you've seen us before.
We do try and take the more serious topics
True.
seriously occasionally, but most of the time we all have that dark sense of humor where if something tickles our funny bone, we just kind of it comes out.
Yeah, sometimes that gallows humor just kind of takes over.
So we are going to be discussing a specific case that was brought to our attention via TikTok. I believe Geek Gumshoe, did you put together a little like synopsis of
I do.
the
I've got a
case?
little brief wrap up here. I'm going to read off of the iPad so that we
Ooh,
make sure that we get
schmancy.
everything covered. And I might have to put my glasses on too because I can't seem to get this to enlarge. Don't make fun of me for having four eyes.
I didn't say nothing.
Uh-huh. All right. On July 9th of 1993, police received a bizarre 911 call from a man stating his wife had been shot, but he could not say if she shot herself or he had shot her. Officers arrived at the scene to find Stephanie Wasilishin deceased on the floor of her bedroom in a home she shared with Russell Peterson, the man who had made the call. The couple lived with Stephanie's daughter, Nicole, and Christina, a child that they had together. Stephanie had died from a single gunshot wound from a revolver that, up until that night, had been stored in a bedroom closet. Russell would go on to tell police that on the evening of the event, he had returned home from work and gotten into a heated conversation with Stephanie, during which she had retrieved the pistol and fired a single shot in his direction. They then went to the bedroom where a scuffle occurred, resulting in the shot that ended Stephanie's life. In the following days, Russell would change his story to say he had not scuffled with her and that she had shot herself. Medical examiner listed the manner of death as a homicide, specifically due to some curious findings in a gunshot residue test. To this day, no charges have been filed. The victim's daughter, Nicole, had been scheduled to be on the show, but had to back out at the last minute, but gave her support and blessing for us to dive into this case.
Very, very good.
Yes, she did.
Yeah, she was between her job, which I don't know what exactly she did, but I do know that she works very long shifts. Like she said, like 12-hour shifts on very odd days. We were having issues trying to get a live stream because she would be working on her typical live stream time. So we had another time set up, but then something fell through with that. And
yeah, I think she was feeling bad.
Yep. So she wasn't feeling great, and she said, go ahead with the case. Please feel free to cover it. Please do cover it. And so here we are now live streaming, and that's how we got here.
And I'm glad that she was willing to just let us go ahead and handle it. This is a case that the more we started to dive into it, the more interesting it became. And one of the great things about this was that she provided us copies of the autopsy and the case file that she received from the police department. Mm-hmm. So I was able to go in and study all of those documents and see what exactly occurred in the case as far as what information was released when she asked for it, and kind of develop a bit of an understanding for what happened and why things have gone the way that they have in the 30 years since the event.
So one of the things.
Oh, yeah.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. So one of the things that I really want to start off by saying is that when you are a podcaster and you start covering true crime, you have to almost have an element of expertise. And if you notice, most of the time we cover true crime cases, we do bring Geek Gumshoe in because, quite honestly, I don't have that background. I cannot answer all of those questions. I cannot tell you, even sometimes what the terminology is. Lauren and I were having a conversation earlier this week, and I asked her a simple question about, what do you think the word homicide means? And we're going to kind of address some of those things because I find that not everybody fully understands all of the details. So, and that is why we have called on Geek Gumshoe to come help us out in this case, because there is a lot of information that just reading through, I was just like, oh, okay. So anyway,
yeah, I think
we are not the experts. He is.
Right. I think a lot of podcasters kind of shortchange their audience a little bit when they come on and they talk about a case, especially a cold case, and they start offering perspective from their own scope of reference, which usually means they have no scope of reference for what's happening. They do a little bit of research online, find out a little bit about what happened, and they have a lot of very strong opinions usually as far as what was done right, what was done wrong. And unfortunately, most of the opinions that get formed when it comes to a true crime case are formed based on what people see on TV. There's a lot of true crime shows on, and you get a little bit of perspective on that. But one of the things that I faced throughout my entire career was that people form opinions based on what they see on police procedural programs, things like Law and Order, things that are written from an entertainment perspective and not from the perspective of facts or procedures that actually take place. So there's a whole lot of people out there that are kind of shortchanging their audience by trying to approach a true crime case themselves without reaching out to somebody that actually might have an answer for why things were done a certain way or weren't done a certain way. And instead of criticizing the way things were done, maybe have somebody come on to explain that.
Which I do have questions about this case that
Oh, I'm sure.
when I was reading that, like, a very specific point of this case, when I was reading through, the younger sister came out and saw what had happened. And one of the first things they said was, daddy shot mommy. And there's an interview with this child. And one of the things that happens, well, what happened? Obviously, this is a child. I mean, little, like toddler, 3-year-old. So they're having to repeat the same questions. You can tell in the interview, it's a
Yes.
difficult interview. So I totally get that. But one of the things, I wish I had found the recording of it, because I would have loved to have heard the tone. In one of the lines, well, what happened? Daddy shot mommy. Well, did you see daddy shoot mommy? Yes. No, you didn't. And then continues on. Literally says, no, you didn't. Is there any sort of, is that something typically they would say or do? Or was that kind of like an odd curveball in that interview? Because that threw me so hard. And they only said it once. The kid did say multiple times, I did not see it. I did not see it. I did not see it.
So let's set up a little bit more of the way this went so that we can get a little bit of perspective on the case. So according to, in fact, I've got a video of the 911 call. So let's go to that. The 911 call that started all this is really weird.
It is.
It's 911. What's your emergency? I need help. What kind of help, sir? There has been a very bad accident. Where at? It's 530 Coffee Pot Drive. In Sedona. Okay, how many vehicles? No, there's no vehicles. Me and my wife, we were in an argument, and she's hurt. She's hurt very bad. I need help. Okay, what's wrong with her? She's been shot. She was shot? Yes. Who shot her? We were... I don't know. You don't know who shot her? She might have shot herself.
All right. So before we dive too deep into the 911 call, let's talk a little bit more about how this went down.
Okay.
So, according to Russell, the guy that was on that call, he had come home from work that evening, and Stephanie wanted to have a conversation. And during the conversation, she started telling him that she had been talking with her ex-boyfriend for a couple of hours. And during the course of that, and understand that the boyfriend is the father of the other child that lived with them. And so she told him that she had been talking for like 2.5 hours on the phone with her ex. And there's a lot of speculation that may have fueled what happened. But also during the course of that conversation, the two of them consumed a bottle of wine together. And he had just come home from work. He was a chef. And she told him that he stunk of a restaurant and told him to go take a shower. So he did. He came back from the shower, and according to his testimony, because keep in mind, we only have one side of this story other than the evidence. And he said that during the conversation, she got up and went to the bedroom, came back carrying a 44 Magnum revolver, and told him, I'm going to shoot you, and fired a single shot in his direction. She then walked back to the bedroom. And after he sat there thinking about this for a few seconds, he went back to the bathroom or to the bedroom. And in whatever ensued next, she ended up with a single gunshot wound that ended her life. And he called the police. Now, during the time that this happened, and this is according to his own statements, their young daughter, a 3-year-old, woke up and he turned around and saw her standing in the hallway. And during this time, he reached down and he picked up the revolver off of the ground, put it back in the holster, and put it in the closet.
saw. I'm sorry. Did you say her or him? She saw him, the father, standing in the hallway,
Right.
right? Okay. Sorry.
The child saw him standing there. He picks up
Right.
the revolver, puts it back in the holster, puts it in the closet, then thinks better of that, takes it out, puts it back on the floor where he got it from. During this time, he realizes that the 3-year-old has been watching everything that's been going on. Then his next move, which throws a lot of people, is that he made a phone call to, I believe it was his dad. And then after talking to his dad, he picks up the phone and he calls 911. And he reports that call that we just listened to. Then the police arrive on the scene and they come in and they start doing what they do. And one of the things that happened was that they interviewed the child. The 10-year-old daughter, the one who was supposed to be on the show tonight, slept through the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the 3-year-old is interviewed at the scene. And so, Lauren, to your point, they asked her there, did you see what happened? And she repeatedly said, Poppy killed mommy.
Mm-hmm.
They asked her in a number of different ways, did you see it happen? And she never really just comes out and says, no, I didn't see it happen. But through context, it's very obvious that she didn't see the event, that what she saw was him picking up that gun off the floor.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then putting it in the closet. So now going back to the investigator asking the question, let's do a little bit more background setup. So the Sedona, Arizona Police Department to this day has less than 80 people on its department. I looked it up the other day. I cannot remember the exact number. It is a very small department. Do you know what their average annual homicide rate is? Goose egg.
0. Okay.
They have so few homicides that over time it averages out to 0.
Wow.
Well, what this means is it's a plus and a minus, because it's the same situation that the department I worked for faced. We had very few homicides, which meant that we didn't work a lot of homicides.
Mm-hmm.
So when we did, we had to approach it very fresh and very new. We did have detectives that were trained a little bit more than others on homicides, but because we didn't work them a lot, it means that we were not just the best out there. You take, for example, in comparison, a department like the Memphis Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
Memphis Police Department had an entire show about their homicide division. And one of the things that came out of that was, there's a lot of homicides, but these guys are good because they have to be. They work it so much. So what we have is a very small department with almost no homicides. Now they're handed a homicide. And so mistakes are going to be made, and we have to accept that going in. Is that an excuse for sloppy police work? No. It's an understanding, though, for why things might go the way that they do. So when you're asking questions of a child in particular, there's a reason why you don't just hand a 3-year-old to a basic detective, because he's not necessarily going to know how to talk to a 3-year-old. And in this particular case, I think what happened was they had asked her that question so many times that when they got her sitting down for the formal interview and they asked her that question, they already knew the answer to the question. So he answered it for her when she didn't give the same answer she had been giving all along. So it was a typical, I would almost bet money that guy's a parent. And that when he heard the child say yes, he knew she had not, and he corrected her with that. But there's also another possibility for that being the fact that as I read through the case file, there was a lot of mistakes in the transcription. So I cannot say for sure that that's actually the way that particular conversation went.
That's fair. Yeah.
Without hearing the recording, I can't say for sure, but that would be my explanation for that, is that he preempted her answer because he already knew the answer to it, which is, it's not the best thing in police work, especially dealing with children, but I think that's why that went that way. DL?
I think
I do have a question. Yes. So when you are dealing with small, can y'all hear me?
Hi.
Hello?
Yeah, it's just a bit laggy.
Okay. So when you are dealing with police work and you are dealing dealing with a child as a potential witness, what is there an age where you say, because I mean, honestly, I have a 5-year-old and 6-year-old grandchild, and I don't know that I would want to put my fate in the hands of a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, because honestly, they are so easily in. I mean, think
Mhm.
about it. Think
No,
about it.
no,
They are
they
so
are.
easily influenced. They are so, and I mean, and that was one of the things that I'm very curious about. So when you have a situation like that, and you have a child who is a potential witness. I mean, and even the 10-year-old, Nikki herself said that she was 10-year-old, and she has recounted on many talks or many of these different podcasts that she's been on, and information that she remembers details of the night, but she doesn't, I mean, like, she doesn't recall everything. She remembers, like, one of the shows that I was watching, she was talking about whether or not she remembered if she was the babysitter that day for her sister, or so there was some details that, even, and I know that could be 30 years ago,
Mhm.
but it could also be, your 10-year-old brain. Some things you are just, I mean, children are not the most trustworthy when it comes to
Mm.
answering questions.
Laura?
I also have a jump off of that question, which I feel like is related, so you could probably answer both at the same time.
Okay.
When it comes to the susceptibility of how easily a child can be influenced, one of the things that Nikki talked about a lot on her TikTok was when all of this happened, when they left the house and were driven to the station, they put her little sister, and their father, not Nikki's father, but the older, the
Mhm.
younger one's father, all in the back of the same cop car. And she remembers him, hugging onto her so hard and whispering things in her ear and all of that. She was very adamant speaking about that online.
Yeah.
And just when it comes to like how easily a kid can be influenced, is that also a normal practice that would happen, or is that just because of the size of the police force and
It-
they
it-
probably didn't have the space?
it wasn't really lack of space as much as lack of experience, I think. So one of the things that you'll see a lot on TV shows that does not happen in a properly handled investigation is people being interviewed or staged together in the same room. As soon as we get to a scene, the first thing we do is separate everybody involved, because we do not want any kind of corruption of the version of the story, because that honestly is where your best investigation comes in, is you get your witnesses, your victims, your suspects, and you separate them all, and then you get them to a room where they can tell their side of the story, because then if they're not being honest, they're going to paint themselves into a corner they can't get out of. One suspect is going to tell one version of the story, another suspect is going to tell another version. So you'll have Detective A in the room with suspect 1, Detective B in the room with suspect 2, and then they start playing them against each other. Then you'll start seeing things come in like, oh, well, your friend is telling us this. And then everybody starts thinking, I better be the one to tell the first straight story about this, because then I get the deal. So the idea is to play them against each other. But when it comes to multiple witnesses, you separate them out, especially from your suspect. If you have a suspect that has influence of any sort over your victims, you get them away from that child or that other person, so that they cannot pollute that person's perspective on the case. So yeah, it was poorly handled. I think the officers probably got in there and weren't really sure exactly how to deal with such a case. And to be honest, a lot of times what you end up with is, when you walk into a case that appears to be someone who has taken the self-checkout option, a lot of detectives and officers go under that assumption that that's what happened. And so they don't take the serious approach to the case that they should have when it comes to separating people out and getting those statements in a totally separate thing. Now, to the other point that DL was making, we have what's called a forensic interview specialist that handles cases involving children. And what they will do is they go in because they know the way a child's brain works. They go in knowing how to ask questions in multiple ways to see if the child has been programmed in how to answer, and to get to the bottom of basically what happened. Now, generally, this works with CSA cases, But when it comes to something like a homicide, you would use the same approach, because you don't want a detective with no experience in interviewing children to be the one that interviews a potential actual witness to what happened.
We've had a lot of comments coming
Aye.
through, and Joey's in the background running a bunch of
Oh,
them. But
wow.
I hate to ask
Yes,
Joey,
yes.
but can we hit some of these highlights and go
Aye.
ahead and
Yeah,
read
y'all
a
read it,
couple
because
of
I
them real
can't see
quick?
it on my screen. My screen's this big, so
Magda, would you mind?
Aye. No, not at all.
I want to hear Magda speak anyway.
I
She
know.
hasn't told me.
I know.
Skylar says trauma does cause a blockage of memory as well, which I was thinking
Absolutely.
that as if
Yes.
something is just so traumatic that it can cause you to disassociate from things. Skylar also says at that time, children advocates weren't used for interviewing children. So
Oh wow. I'd be curious to know.
I was
Oh,
going to
okay.
ask that. Is that
when that was
true though? Is
normalized.
it?
Yeah.
I mean, I noticed 13 years
1993
ago.
was a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago.
See,
I
that's what
started
I was
in police work
thinking.
in 1997. Those things were in place. I can't say for sure that that was not in place then, but I think, I don't know. I'd have to do some research to say for
So,
sure, but
best
I'm not
guess
going to
for that.
challenge her on that. I'm just going to say that I know that 4 years later it was in place.
Mhm.
We have another comment.
Well, we can
from
also
Judy.
say. Oh,
sorry.
actually,
She
before we
says-
jump into that, in Skylar's comment, she actually does not reside in the
Oh,
States.
she's
So there
not
may
in the
have been
States.
some difference, but because she's in Canada, so
Oh,
there
that's
may have
right.
been some difference.
And that's
Yeah.
something you got to think about too, is not only is Canada a different country, but every state is a little different in how they handle things. And every city in those states is a little different.
America
yes.
might as well be like a big thing with tiny little countries inside of itself.
Mhm.
Essentially, we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we had a couple more to run through.
I think we're looking at Julie's.
Julie says, as a 3-year-old, would she not have been scared that if Daddy shot Mommy, he could do it to me too?
I don't think so.
DL, give us the quote.
Yes. Oh, okay. So one of the most profound quotes that sticks in my brain, and this was, I found this in the Crow, and when Eric has the mother, and she is looking in the mirror and he is making the stuff come out of her veins. I think she was shooting heroin at the time. I don't know if I just screwed us up, but oh God, let me find the quote. I'm sorry. You caught me off guard. I usually have everything ready.
Look, if we
Mother is
haven't
the
already
name of God
completely
on the lips of children.
deplatformed ourselves tonight, I think.
Thank
Thank
Magda
you.
just
Thank
said it.
you. Just she said
Mother
it. She just
is-
quoted it.
What was it, Magda?
Mother is the name of God on the lips of children.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The lips and hearts
I
of
don't know
all
if
children.
you've ever.
Yes.
I don't know who quoted that or wrote that, but if you've ever had a 3-year-old and they've gotten in trouble and you have had to like get onto them and like really get down on it and like, no, you're not supposed to be doing that. Why that's gonna hurt yourself. You feel so bad, or I don't know about everyone. I feel so bad having to get onto my children. They feel so bad. And then after like 5 seconds of me having to get onto them, we'd be sitting there hugging and holding each other and both like, I love you. I'm sorry. I'm crying. I don't feel like a 3-year-old would have that I am in danger.
Yeah.
I
I think there was a lot of confusion about what she was seeing. And to be fair, even from my perspective as an investigator, when I walk into a death scene, there's something very surreal about it. So to have it be a family member that's occurring in front of you and you're 3 to 10 years old, you're not going to know where to put that.
Yeah.
So did we have more comments?
I think there was like a couple more before we move on.
Well, and when you're talking.
Joey the roadie says it's kind of hard to believe that someone slept through a gunshot near point blank.
You know me. Sorry, that's my husband. You know me. I'd sleep through a gunshot.
Gunshots are not as loud in a house as you might think. When you start putting things like furniture and curtains and things into a house, those become silencers to a degree. And you can one great case, and this may be where DL's raising her hand. So the Amityville case, I homicides that led to the Amityville horror
Oh,
case. What was the family name? I cannot think of it all.
the
of a sudden.
DeFeo case.
DeFeo case. This guy goes through the house.
DeFeo. Okay.
Yeah, DeFeo, right. This guy goes through the
My
house
goodness.
firing shots all through the house, and nobody hears it to wake up. And people were like, oh, well, it must have been supernatural because, nobody could sleep. Absolutely, people can sleep through that.
I do have a question when it comes to sleeping through and the gunshots and all of that, to jump off of that. The first warning shot. Okay, so for people who don't know this case at all, there is an interview you can listen to that is recorded with the husband. And one of the things I found very interesting was when he was telling the story, he very much in the same voice that he has in a flat tone said, well, when she came in, she said, I'm going to shoot you, Russell, or something along those lines. He didn't change his tone. He didn't anything else. It just sounded like he was telling a story from the same thing. And then I walked to the mailbox and I got the mail out of the mail. Just sounded like a very regular story. And I do know, because I've done a bit of research into this, there is some psychology about when someone is saying something that someone else said, typically they will take on kind of almost the tone of that person. I don't know if that is true or if that is like some made up BS that I found out there. But when it comes to that, his tone was very much flat. And also, I want to talk about the psychology behind that first gunshot and where it was aimed. Because that first warning shot that he says that she came in and I'm going to shoot you, and then she gives him a warning shot, the room behind that room, the daughter who says she slept there, so the 10-year-old, she says in the interview later, or not in the interview, sorry, on TikTok later, when she's doing interviews about this case, she says and points out that was her room. That warning shot that she shot at the husband, the older daughter states the wall behind that was where she was sleeping. Okay. So I kind of also wanted to talk about the psychology of that.
All right, so go into that then.
Me with the psychology, or I think
actually before you go with that. Well, actually, I want to comment something, because in one of the other podcasts that I was listening to, she said that she was in the garage, that the garage had been renovated and had been made into her room. Now, of course, I haven't looked at a blueprint. I don't know. I haven't looked at the schematics to determine where the gunshot, the first, where they found ballistics or anything of that nature, or, if they found bullet holes or anything of that nature. But so that was actually something I wanted to go ahead and comment on, because in reference to hearing it, she said that she couldn't hear anything because she was actually in the garage and the door was closed. So, and I do have, there was a clip. I think that was on Sipping on Some Crime. It was either Sipping on Some Crime or, excuse me, I know we try to censor the F word, but there's one called F that I listened to that was fascinating. So, but it was one of those two where she was talking about the location and not being able to hear very well. But go ahead. I know, I want to hear this.
To jump off of that, in one of
I think you and I kind of had the same mindset.
Yeah, no, to jump off of that, in one of the TikTok lives that she was on, because I've been jumping off and on where I can just to hear her talk about the case. She stated that the wall led to where she was sleeping, to her room. So I didn't hear anything about, she wouldn't have heard any of that, but she just did specifically state like that first warning gunshot that the mom shot faced where she was sleeping. And I don't know about y'all, but like, as a mother, even if I am like in a homicidal rage, there is no way I'm going to point a gun at the wall that my child sleeps in because I'm so mad at this guy and shoot a warning shot through the wall facing where my child is sleeping in the next room. All right, unless she is some sort of one of those moms who's just, everything must go, which does apparently that does happen. Unless it is one of those scenarios, I cannot in any way see that scenario happening.
Okay, so there's three things we need to unpack when it comes to this. One is, let's talk a little bit about victimology. So our victim in this case according to interviews that happened that are in the case file, she came from an abusive environment growing up. She had some problems with her parents' home and some abuse that was suffered there. She also apparently went from relationship to relationship with abusive men, including the last one that she was in before the one that resulted in the end of her life. I am not a psychologist, but from my line of experience and from having had friends with the same conditions, all of the interviews described the same person, and that person is someone with a severe bipolar disorder.
Okay.
And on top of that, this victim appeared also to be a severe alcoholic. People reported that during the cleanup of the house, they were finding bottles hidden in all kinds of places around the house, which means we have someone with what's called a dual diagnosis disorder. So you have a mental disorder that is compounded by alcohol abuse. She is self-medicating with alcohol. This contributes to a lot when it comes to the nature of the relationship as people described it. Even the children described the relationship the same way the adults that were interviewed described it. That Stephanie had a bit of a temper, and that she had a tendency to be extremely irrational and very angry. And she liked to push Russell's buttons. So going into that, we also look at the fact that the autopsy on the night of the incident revealed that her blood alcohol level was 1.7. Oh, I'm sorry, 0.17, my bad, 0.17. That is almost twice the legal limit for DUI. So on top of the fact that she had some mental issues that she was dealing with, she was extremely drunk. The fact that they consumed a bottle of wine that they shared meant that she had already been drinking severely before he came home and shared that bottle of wine with her. In a case like that, what you're going to find is that factors like who's on the other side of that wall don't matter. We cannot go from the foundation of no mother in her right mind, because she was not in her right mind at this point.
Okay. Fair.
Now, another fact that I'm looking at in this case is, if I read this correctly, the bullet that was taken out of the wall in that case, in that initial shot, also passed through a curtain, which means that was an exterior wall that she fired that shot into, not a wall that went into a bedroom. Nobody puts a bedroom on the other side of a wall with a window in it.
Wow.
So in order
What about
for
a added
pass
on?
through,
Wait a minute. What about if they added on a garage? Because
that's a possibility, but we don't know.
in my house, I have a window that looks into my garage.
My point being that by description, the bullet passed through a curtain and into the wall. So I don't know for sure, because I do not have a floor plan of the house, but I think there might have been some mistakes made when it comes to the description of the way that went down. But the fact is that even if that was a room that was occupied by her child, you cannot go on any kind of a judgment of no mother in her right mind would have done that, because she clearly was not when this happened.
It's difficult for me not to, but I will do my best. I'm judgy,
May I ask
y'all.
a quick question also?
Go ahead.
No. You know what? We have a tendency to look at things a little bit different. We've had a chance to look at all of the details. We've been watching it, and we've been going. It's like he's been reading all of the documentation. You've been watching her on TikTok. I've been watching all of these different podcasts that she's been on. So it's a culmination of a lot of different information from very different perspectives, and I think we all have very different perspectives here. One of the things that I would like to ask, because you did comment that they had her blood alcohol level, can you tell us what his was?
I don't know that they took it.
Do we know what his
in it?
Okay.
By today's standard,
I know
we would do that, but I don't know in 1993 if they would have. Hers was taken as a matter of course for the autopsy, but I don't know if his was taken. Lauren, do you have something on that?
I have another thing to jump off of that with that really bothers me, and I want someone to give me an explanation on this shit.
Okay.
So they didn't take his blood. Okay. fair enough, I guess. They're all in shock, and they're a small department. They're not used to this. They also did not. They tested her hands for the residue, for gun
GSR.
residue. Thank you. Yeah. They did not test his.
Do we know for sure that that's the case?
It's not listed in any of the documentation that she provided me that his was ever taken.
Right.
And it also was stated, she stated multiple times, but then again, you have to take that as it is. It's someone 30 years later giving their recollection of it. But in that, and I'm going into the specifics here, in an interview, they asked him, well, who was holding the gun? Well, she was holding the gun. Okay, what hand was she holding the gun in? Well, she's right-handed. It had to have been her right hand. Her right hand did not pop for any residue. Would you say the GSR test?
GSR. Gunshot residue.
Gunshot residue. Thank you. Her left hand did, which to me is very if someone is, I don't know if y'all have any, I know you do, but if someone is pointing a gun at you, what hand, if they're pointing their right hand gun at you, what hand do you go to block that to try and push it away from you? Because to me, it would be the opposite hand. And it just, I don't know, y'all, it really bugs me.
There's a lot of weight that's been put on that by a lot of the podcasters out there, that this is their sticking point for the whole thing. And one thing that you've got to keep in mind is, much like DNA, people get hung up on DNA. An absence of GSR or gunshot residue on a hand does not mean that somebody didn't pull a trigger. It also does not mean that there was not a gun fired in their presence. One of the things that you got to understand about this is that the gun in this case was a 44 Magnum with a 7-inch barrel. If the person's hand was not past the cylinder on the gun in some way, there may not have been any GSR deposited on their hands. That's a very large firearm. And so the point being that a lack of gunshot residue does not imply guilt or innocence at all. Gunshot residue is very easy to wipe off. It's commonly accidentally wiped off, but the presence
not if
of
you're
it
dead.
on her left hand also doesn't necessarily imply that gun had to be fired that way. And if y'all will grant me a little bit of a leeway on that, I will explain at the very end of this why I think that is what happened.
Okay. No, I definitely want to hear what you think went down.
I have a yes. I do have a question. One of the comments, and I think it was our friend at Huff Photo, our friend Brian Huff at Huff Photo, one of our favorite photographers ever. If you haven't booked with him, you need to. Okay, sorry. Mine, shameless plug. He commented that he felt like there was a struggle for the gun. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, and I think this is something that Lauren and I have talked about before. And if you are in a situation, let's say you have somebody that is coming at you. First of all, I think that you're going to try to hold it with your dominant hand, because that's going to be what you have the most strength in. But you might actually, especially if they have more strength than you, might be like moving it, working with both hands to try to make sure that it is not shooting at you. Me personally, now I don't have somebody holding something at me. Maybe later if somebody wants to point something at me and we could reenact this, that's a different story. Not a gun. Please don't shoot a gun. Don't point a gun. I know you will. But I'm trying to, but wait a minute. But we also have to think about in terms of height difference. I don't know what her height difference is versus mine. What his height difference. Yeah. So you might have, depending on what their height is, there might be some aspect of that we're completely not thinking about. Because, there are so many factors involved here. Yes, Lauren.
Okay, so Geek Gumshoe, you read the case file.
You raised
Can
your
you-
hand. Did you have a question?
I did. Yes, I did. On the specifics of where the shot entered and where it left, can you give us a like specific point at your neck or area, shoulder, wherever you think it was that they talked about? Can you show us the entrance and then give us an idea of the exit, please?
All right. So the entrance wound for the gunshot was in her lower left side of her throat.
Mm-hmm.
The shot exited through the upper right side of her neck, just below the line of her skull, and passed. I believe it passed through her spinal column in the process. So it went in here and out here.
Okay. So if I'm holding the gun, just the scenario here. If I'm here's my mouse. If
Mhm.
I'm holding the gun and I'm in a struggle and somehow this gun goes from me holding it out to you to me aimed backwards towards myself, aimed this way and almost flat, but slightly up to the left. Oh no, I'm clicking stuff. Don't use the mouse for that. My bad. My cell phone. How does that
Sorry.
how does that wind up in a struggle unless someone is like, I cannot see how that winds up that way unless they're literally on the floor like WWE wrestling it out with the gun.
Well, and we got to keep in mind too, it's a 7-inch barrel on this thing. So we're talking about a barrel like this.
We don't know that.
No, we do know that.
We do know that. So
we do know that gun had a 7-inch barrel. It was I think it was a Ruger Black Hawk or Red Hawk.
I'm not
44.
okay. So
No,
7-inch barrel. And I just don't it's that way, y'all. I'm sorry.
All right.
No, we know the barrel length. We know the details of the gun. What I'm thinking about is what was the position of the two bodies when the shot was fired? If they were,
Right.
if there was a situation
Oh.
where she was struggling, was she sitting on top of him, trying to fight the gun? So we don't know what position. You know, if you're fighting for your life and somebody's got a gun and they're shooting it at you, you're going to be all over the place. You're going to do whatever it takes to try to save your own life and get yourself and your family and your kids out of there. But I don't know where she was.
Before I go too much down in that, because what I want to do is as we get ready to wrap this up, I want to give my assessment of what I think happened during this incident.
Okay.
I've built a scene based on the evidence, and I want to present that as we get a little closer. But one of the things that I wanted to visit before we get there is a hang-up that a lot of podcasters have on this case. And that is that the medical examiner's determination of the cause of death was homicide. And they're like, well, there it is. If the medical examiner says homicide, why hasn't he been arrested yet?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the fact is that homicide and murder are two different things. So a homicide means that it was a death caused by some kind of participation of another person. A murder is a deliberate act that causes the death of another person. And it could be something that you planned. It could be something that happened spontaneously, or it could be something that you did by accident and didn't intend for it to end up as a murder, but it did. So what we've got is a document from the medical examiner that says homicide. And a lot of people are hung up on it thinking that's all you really need. But if the medical examiner says it's homicide, but cannot say that the manner of death was something that was deliberate, then that puts us in a position of having to put the puzzle pieces together. And that's where the problems in this case come in, is that because there was only one person that walked out of that room, and his story is the only one we've got, that we don't really know exactly what went down. Now let's talk about the fact that his story on what happened changed.
Thank you. I was about to ask.
So the first interview with Russell, He told the investigators that they struggled over the gun, and in the course of that, the gun went off. The second interview, or a subsequent interview, he said that he didn't struggle with her for the gun, and that the gun, that it had been a self-checkout situation, that she had decided to take herself off the board, so she pulled the trigger, and she was the one that was responsible for it. He claimed that he stood at the entrance to the room and watched it happen. And this is where things start to really fall apart for his version of the case, is that, you know, he told one version of it when he was first interviewed, then he told another version of it a few days after. Lauren.
I'm dying. I'm sorry. I'm dying over here. Okay. So the second interview, the self-checkout interview where that was the case, I read, like, the interviews were the thing I really dug into on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I did happen to notice, and I know that this is a tactic that people will use when they're interviewing a suspect. They'll offer them an easier out to see if the story changes. And he offered him that easier out. Well, are you sure she didn't? You might be covering. Are you sure she didn't, do it herself? She didn't. And dude, he took it. It's like the whole thing. He was like, oh, well, that might have happened. And then suddenly that was the story. But he did not even mention it until the officer suggested it. And I know that that's a tactic to see if the story will change, to see how reliable their story is. I do get that. But for the fact that it stopped there and it didn't continue on, they're like, oh, well, that's not what you said earlier. Like, I don't know, dude, that really bugs me. And can you please tell me what is up with that?
So the alternative reality story is not given so that you can see if their story changes. It's given because, and we see this in this case in several instances, that giving your suspect the ability to kind of soften what happened is a way to break someone from sticking solely to a version that doesn't make sense. And so if you can't get them to admit to their role in something, you give them a softer approach. Okay, so maybe you didn't go after this guy with the intent of taking him off the board. Maybe there was something that happened that caused this. Maybe you went over to talk to him and things got out of hand. And what the reason for doing that is you give them a little bit of something to latch onto, and eventually they will come around full circle and they will tell you more about what actually went down, because you've gone from the, I'm accusing you of an act of murder. Now you're giving them an out of, oh, maybe it was self-defense. And then as he's laying his self-defense story, you suddenly find out there was no self-defense involved. You've gotten him loosened up. Now he's telling his story. Now, going from, I think you murdered this person, to I think it was a self-checkout situation is a very different thing. I don't think that was handled well. But what I also saw was that he put that together between sessions, and it kind of lends to what I think went down in this entire case. And if y'all want, as we get closer to the top of the hour here, what I think I want to do is I want to run down what I think went down on the evening that this happened. And then I want to offer a little bit of advice to fellow podcasters as a result of cases like this. So looking at the case reports and the interviews, one of the things that stands out, for starters, you find that the first story that's told tends to be closer to the truth than anything else that happens down the line. What's our first version of this story?
The struggle.
Now, what is the first version of the story that we have to go?
She fired a shot. Yeah, there was
the 911 call.
Yeah, the 911 call. He said there was a struggle, and he doesn't know if she shot
the 911 call. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So
he doesn't know who shot who.
911.
Yeah.
If you listen to the 911 call, it tells a version of the story that makes a whole lot of sense. He tells a story about he doesn't know what happened exactly. He doesn't know who shot who. And I think that's the reality of this story. I don't believe that Russell Peterson murdered Stephanie Wasilishin. I don't believe that she checked herself out. I think the truth lies somewhere in between. And here's what I think went down that night. I think that while he was at work, we know that he was getting ready to go out of town for 2 weeks for a training class to make him a more accomplished chef.
Mm-hmm.
We know that from interviewing friends and family, there was some jealousy there on her part. And she was really struggling with this. One of the things that she used to do all the time in their relationship was she would tell him that she had had an affair with somebody that he knew in order to get a reaction out of him. And then she would immediately turn around after the discussion was over and she would deny it. In this case, I think that the conversation with the ex was being used as fuel to get his goat. I think that she had been sitting home fuming over the fact that he was getting ready to go to this training class. I think that she was drinking. I think that she was having a bit of her depressive side and that it was starting to get the best of her. I think she went into the bedroom, got into the closet and staged that Ruger firearm in a way that she could get to it easily because I think she was trying to make a point. I do not think that her intent was to shoot him. I think her intent was to create drama. Because one thing that I know about people that have that kind of bipolar disorder is that they thrive on drama. They like to get people fired up. And I think that with the alcohol that she had in her system, this was sounding like a really great idea. One of the things we know about that evening was that she had called him on a couple of occasions to ask him when he was going to be home, because I think she was planning on making a scene. And the fact that he worked so late, I think was driving a little bit more of what went down that night. So he comes home from work, and I think she's starting to come down off of that just a little bit. And then we add the wine to the situation, and I think it started to sound like a good idea again. And then by the time he got out of the shower, I think that the fact that he didn't react the way she had hoped he was going to react to telling him that she had spent 2.5 hours on the phone with her ex, I think it got her temper up, and she walked into the bedroom and she grabbed that gun from where she had staged it. She walked into the other room and told him, "Russell, I'm going to shoot you." And she fired a shot. Now, why do I think this is the case? Because this is the most consistently steady thing that he has said in every.
Oh, I think he froze.
Oh, no.
Okay, Geek Gumshoe, if you can hear me, you froze. But I am going to agree with you. It is the most consistent thing he has ever stated in every single interview. That is one of the things that did never change. And I had not thought of that before, because the story after that, the second shot has changed multiple times.
Well, I know that quite often people want something that's definitive. They want to be able to say, this is what happened and here's who to blame.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have this sort of situation where there's technically no one can take all of the blame, it's not murder, it's not self-inflicted, it's a combination of the two, of bad situation of two strong personalities that clashed with each other and things went horribly bad.
I can see that line of thinking. I really can. But on the flip side, I can also understand being a family member, being one of those kids, and everything that has happened since. Like, I can't imagine, even if it is accidental, even if it was, oopsie, my bad, we struggled over the gun, how nothing ever came from at least that.
No.
Even if someone, if I, whoops, and I killed Bob, the train guy. I don't know who Bob the train guy is, but I'm making him up. There's DL. Yay, hi back. Can you say a hi?
Hi. I don't know if it's everything is just like
You're fine. We've continued.
That's good.
We have, for those of you who don't know, we have a major winter storm coming in, and it is
Mhm.
evidently affecting a lot of the internet connection in our area right now. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
okay. Where we continued on, and I absolutely agree with Geek Gumshoe on the fact that that is something that did never change through any of the stories. I did not realize it until he had said that, and then I was like, you know what? He's right.
Yeah.
That is the one thing that did never change. But even if it was accidental, if I act as I was telling Magda, if I accidentally shoot Bob the train guy, I should still be brought onto charges. Something should still happen. If I accidentally kill someone, something, at least a trial where other people like sit down and hear the facts and okay, what happened? Oh, you were drunk and you thought it would be fun to go shoot at the train tracks. You accidentally shoot Bob the train guy. Well, maybe you shouldn't,
But
I
here's the
feel Mhm.
but here's the thing. If you okay, so while we're waiting for Geek Gumshoe to jump back on with us, if he can, when you're dealing with a very novice police department when handling this type of situation, as he said, as Geek Gumshoe pointed out, he did the research, and their homicide rate is a goose egg 0. So you don't have people with the experience to handle that. And I will say this, although he said that his department did not handle a lot, I know for a fact that he's worked on several homicides, and he has a lot of experience with dealing with these different types of cases and stuff like that. So,
Mhm.
but we don't, you have a situation where you have people who are novice, and then you have um, people who are taking interviews, who are looking at how the children are reacting, how the victim, the victim placement, all of that information. You're listening to the husband's story. There is alcohol involved. There is all kinds of, there's all kinds of things that would make you question. And here's, when you start looking at it, and you have that going back and forth, and you have a 911 call that you're like, I don't know how to react to this. I don't know, because the 911 call to me is absolutely shocking that it is so calm.
It is.
But honestly, if you've ever worked with people who have dealt with trauma, everybody deals with trauma very differently. Some people are going to run, some people are going to scream, and some people are going to be silent. So
I get why Geek Gumshoe came to the conclusion that he did. Hi, speaking of, I get why you
and he's
came to
back.
the conclusion that you did. And I do understand that that's like the one part of the story that did never change. Something still feels off to me. I cannot see someone shooting a warning shot at me and then me just being like, following them back into the bedroom when they have a gun and not being like, I'm getting my kids and getting the F out of here. I don't care how drunk I am at that point. Like,
Yep.
maybe I'm just a different kind of person, but something still feels off to me about the story, and I can't put my finger on it.
Well, one thing that you have to take out of the equation is how you would react in that situation.
It's so hard not to.
It is not a good approach to take with any investigation to say how anyone else would have reacted, because everybody else is going to do things differently. But
true.
once again, there's consistency in the investigation as far as his mindset when he did that. Every interview he did, he answered the exact same way. That she came in, she said, Russell, I'm going to shoot you. She fired the shot, and she went back to the bedroom, and he gave it a second to think about it, and he got up and walked into the bedroom. Now, what changed was what happened once he walked into the bedroom. And this is what I think happened with that. I think that he walked into the bedroom and he struggled with her over the gun, and it went off. And I think that his initial call to 911 was very much in shock and freaked out. And he wasn't really sure exactly what happened. And then what I think messed up the entire case, and this is something that I put together just from reading the case file and reading into the context of things, is he made a phone call, and I believe he said it was to his brother. I think his brother gave him some really bad legal advice and said, you need to change your story to where you did not touch her at all. And it was after that conversation that the entire approach changed. So I think that his brother talked him into doing something stupid, which, I mean, it may be the reason why things have gone the way they have for all these years.
Mhm.
But I've seen in many cases where people will call, they'll be in the middle of a bad situation. They will call a parent before they call 911. And the parent
no,
is
I
usually
would.
like, you need to call 911.
No, if something went down and I was freaked out thinking I might be held responsible, I would call my mommy first. I'm not even going to lie about it.
Yeah. And you're
Well-
not the only one. But now here's what I think went down for the incident itself and why it looks the way that it does.
Mm.
And this is why I think they will never be able to prosecute this case, because I think that the idea of trying to get a first-degree murder conviction or even a second-degree murder conviction on this case is going to be hard to do. Because this is what I think happened. One of the things that he says also consistently in his interviews. Now, in one of the investigative supplements, there was a comment that was made about, we went out and found somebody of similar physical shape, and we gave her the same firearm and tried to get her to pull the trigger. In that write-up, it says very specifically, we tried to get her to pull the trigger double action. So what that means is on a Ruger 44 Magnum, you have a double action revolver, which means that when you squeeze the trigger, it brings the hammer back as part of the action, and then it gets to a point that causes the trigger or the hammer to fall forward. What you find is that, particularly with female shooters, in order to shoot a revolver, they will cock the hammer back, making it a single action fire weapon. In this case, in multiple occasions, he said he heard her cock the hammer before she fired the shot.
He did multiple
He
times.
heard her
You are
cock
right.
the hammer before she went to the bedroom. He heard her cock the hammer before the shot where she said, Russell, I'm going to shoot you. And in so doing, by the investigators saying they couldn't get this woman to squeeze the trigger in double action, they completely left out the fact that he had said she was firing at single action. Now, the problem with single action on a revolver is it makes it a very unstable weapon. It takes nothing. A toddler could squeeze the trigger at that point. And what I think happened in this case was that when he followed her in the bedroom, I think she had that weapon in her right hand. And I think she went to point it at him. And I think that he went to her and was pushing it back. And I think the reason why her left hand had the gunpowder residue on it was that she put her hand on the weapon to try to force it back in his direction. And what happened was the gun was flipped around backwards with her fingers still in the trigger guard. As the weapon goes around this way, it gets discharged by the fact that her finger is in the trigger guard when it's in this position. They are struggling with the weapon.
Okay.
It comes back. It goes off, which absolutely explains the trajectory of the shot. Nobody had put this up like this. All they had to do was get it flipped around backwards. And I think because he was a large male and she was a small female, that he overpowered her with that. But the fact that her finger was in that trigger guard with the weapon set for single action, I think it went off and nobody intended for it to go off. And I think that's why you're never going to get prosecution from this case, because I do not believe it was intentional on either part. I think it was a horrible accident that happened as a result of some alcohol-induced poor decision-making.
Wow.
And I think that that's why it's going to stay where it is. Now, that being said, I've seen a few podcasts where they've talked about this case, and this is something that everybody needs to think about when you have a case like this. There was one, in fact, that is talking about the murder of Stephanie Wasilishin. If you are a podcaster, if you are a writer, if you are anything where you are producing a statement like that, you're opening yourself up for libel suits.
Yes.
Because the big difference between things like slander and libel is once you produce it, once you put it out as a form of media, if it is not true and it costs that person something, it affects their reputation, you are libelous and you stand to be sued for what you're saying. So that's
Alleged.
one of the reasons why in this case, when we started talking about things, I told DL specifically, we need to refer to this as the death of Stephanie Wasilishin, not the murder, because he is not a convicted murderer. And until someone convicts him of that and a court says that is fact, you are setting yourself up for a lawsuit by saying otherwise.
Yeah, to jump off of that, y'all, if you're covering this and you want to say murder, alleged is your best friend. The alleged murder
Yes.
of this alleged everything, okay, y'all? Oh my gosh.
And you know, a lot of people don't even think about that aspect of it, but that's one of the reasons why we brought in somebody professional, because this is who has the background, who has dealt with these type situations and does understand the vernacular. Because, you know, one of the things that we discussed is that so many people use the word homicide and murder synonymously, and they don't necessarily mean the same thing. Murder or homicide can be accidental. I mean, that falls into a totally different category. And, you know,
it can also be justified.
Yeah.
So there are many categories that go in with the term homicide. It is not an end all be all, and it is not your smoking gun that you're hoping for when it comes to a case like this. The medical examiner simply determines the cause of death, and it's up to the investigators to determine how it happened.
All right, so I have like one more major question for Geek Gumshoe when it comes to this case before we sign off. What are the things that you think, like your top list of these things were handled incorrectly when it comes to this case? And also, what are these things were not handled, like they did this actually correct, even though it sounds backwards or whatever it may be. What are your top lists on both sides when it comes to how the case was handled?
All right. So if there was no GSR test done on your suspect, that's absolutely the top of my list of mistakes that they made during the investigation. The fact that they housed witnesses and suspect together and didn't immediately separate them. There was a lot of things that I think I would have tried to handle a little differently, but I wasn't there. I don't know what factors came into play with that. As far as what they did right, I think the fact that they didn't charge this man based on the assumptions that have been made is good, because one of the problems you run into is if you get ahead of yourself and you charge somebody in a case like this, and they come in, they've got a decent attorney, and they defeat that charge, you can never go you can never go after them again.
Double
By
jeopardy.
not charging him and making sure that your case is solid, you can absolutely make sure that when the time comes, you get the best conviction. But what I think has happened here is that the prosecutors in this case have looked at it and said, this is not a prosecutable case. It's not a matter of poor police work. It's not a matter of anything other than the fact that there is not enough sustainable evidence to prosecute this case with any certainty. You know, you take a gamble when you go into a case like this that the jury is going to sympathize with your suspect and they're going to hear something that you don't want them to hear. And the problem is that prosecutors are political positions. You don't want a bunch of cases that you take to prosecution that you don't win, because then you're not going to win when the next election comes around. So when you hear about people that are talking about, oh, the police have never arrested this guy, they must be corrupt, they must be covering something up. No, if the prosecutor won't let you charge somebody with homicide, you don't get to charge them. It's not your decision in most jurisdictions. The prosecutor has to allow it. And if you submit it to the grand jury and the grand jury says no, it has nothing to do with the investigators or the police department. It has every bit to do with the judicial process and what does or does not happen at that point. And that's something that people need to keep in mind. A lot of times cops really want to see somebody go to jail for something, but the prosecutor's just not into it. And at that point, the officers have to stand down and hope that maybe 10 years down the line, a new prosecutor will come in and go for it. But in this particular case, one of the things that I discovered today was I found that, when Stephanie was telling somebody, or not Stephanie, Nikki was telling somebody recently that her sister had contacted her and said there was new movement on mom's case. And that was 3 years ago.
Mhm.
Well, 3 years ago, there was an article that was done by a news channel in Sedona that
Fox,
said
yeah.
that a new detective had been assigned the cold case to review and see if there was anything to do with it. That detective reviewed that case and found there was nothing he could do. There was nothing new. There was nothing that would give him the chance to prosecute. He said, I will take it to the county and see if they'll do anything. That was 3 years ago, which means that there was nothing that the prosecutors looked at that said this is worthy of us trying to prosecute this case. Nobody's
Yeah,
hiding anything.
So can I ask a question real quick? In a situation like this where you have a cold case that's been sitting there, we know for an absolute fact that there have been internet sleuths that have been able to turn up evidence, turn up information, and be able to help people close cases that the police department were not able to either gain all of the evidence that they needed, or prosecution was not able. And it is, like you said, it is a multi-step process. It is, you have the police department that is handling on the front end, you have DAs and attorneys that are handling on the back end, and it is a multi-step process. But when you start looking at a situation like this, because she has spent a whole lot of time and a whole lot of energy, been on a lot of different podcasts talking about trying to get justice for her family and some semblance, and I don't like to use the word closure, but at least some semblance of justice, something that her family can say, yes, this is, this was, justice was served. What are the right steps? What do, like, our internet friends, is this a good thing for them to continue to go out to podcasts? Is this a good, it's honestly, it was a very fascinating case. We all deep dived into it, and we were just, we kept turning up more and more information. And every time we got together, we're just like, let's talk about it. And then we're like, no, let's don't talk about it. Let's talk about it on the show. But
I was so mad.
I know.
I was so mad at you, Geek Gumshoe. We got together and we were like looking up stuff at my house. Unfortunately, Magda couldn't make it. She lives a lot farther away, but
Several
I had
hours.
DL and Geek Gumshoe over, and I was like, let's put on stuff about the case. He wouldn't say one word to me, y'all. Not one dang word.
Anything.
Wouldn't say anything.
No.
Anyway, I love you, Geek Gumshoe. I do.
Look, here's the thing. If somebody out there understand something, I am a detective from a department that had nothing to do with this case. I'm simply going on what I saw. I also understand that the victim's daughter is saying that she has not been given the full case file, that there are some things she wasn't given.
Mhm.
She's not going to get it. It's an open case. She will only be allowed to get the things that they are willing to let go.
Okay, so
there may be things that they are holding on to that are not out there for her to get, and they will not be until it is not only closed, but prosecuted.
So a question on things that they're probably holding on to, is that going to be stuff that only if you were involved in this case specifically you would know? Okay,
That,
that's what I figured.
or in the case file, they redacted a lot of stuff, especially when it comes to underage parties. Even though they are of age now, they still redacted them because at the time they were not. So there are things like that that are going to happen in that kind of a scenario. But here's the takeaway from this whole thing. I feel like there's a lot of anger that this young lady has toward a man that may not have done anything but tried to stop something bad from happening. And I can't change that. I know she's had a lot of time to stew on this and to be angry and to want to see some justice. But I think that justice has a whole lot of different faces to it. And it does not mean that somebody has to go to prison. At some point, justice can be that you understand that something bad happened to you, and bad stuff happens. We don't all get an easy ride. And sometimes the hardest thing to accept is that we're not going to get the outcome that we had hoped for. And in this case, I would love for someone who has more access to specific evidence that maybe was not in the case file
Mhm.
to tell me that I'm wrong. And I will absolutely own that. But given the material that I saw in the case file, I think there is a perfectly logical explanation for what went down that night. I think there is a logical explanation for why it has not resulted in anybody going to jail. And I think the fact is that it was simply a bad combination of a rocky relationship, a whole lot of alcohol, some mental illness, and a firearm that probably shouldn't have been in that house in the first place. But the fact is that I don't believe there was any ill intent. And when I read his interviews, I do not for a second believe that he went in there that night with the intent of taking her out. He stood to lose too much of what he was dreaming for. The training he was going to, the things that he was going to do with his life, I don't think he would have thrown it away for some half-assed effort to take her out. He
I
didn't
would
stand to gain anything by removing her from the picture.
I would like to say when we started this Geek Gumshoe, I was very much on one side of the
Oh yeah.
fence because
I
I
was
a
too.
lot of the research I had gotten was very this side of the fence. And I see why they haven't gone to the courts or jury or anything like that, because you've given, just in this little podcast, you've given enough evidence to where I'm like, well, no, I could see that way. I could see how that could, and you've made me question enough to where it would be a hung jury if there were 12 of us and
Precisely. That is exactly the way I think it would go, is that if they were to charge him, that he would hire an attorney that would bring a position much like what I just said about what happened, and a jury would sit back and go, that makes sense. Because to be fair, in the interviews they did with friends and family, she was not a shining example of a person that was completely stable. And every description of him was that he was a pretty even-keeled guy, which is why that weird 911 call sounds like it does. I really think that that was just how he was on a daily basis, that he didn't have a whole lot that got to him. I think part of it was shock. I think part of it was he had had a conversation with his dad after this went down, and his dad told him, look, you need to call 911, son, and you need to be as calm as you can. And I think that there was a lot of his everyday personality, but I think also his dad talked him down off of a ledge. And by the time he called 911, I think he had collected his thoughts a little bit and realized, I need to do this and get this thing underway.
There's one more thing. We're well past the top of the hour.
But there's so
I'm
much
a
in this
stickler
one.
for that.
There's so much in this case. There is one more thing I just need to make sure we touch on before we end
Yes.
anything here, and it is the younger sister, who at the time was 3. They did the interviews. They contacted Nikki about, hey, mom's case is opening back again. Last we heard,
She was missing.
she's missing.
Yes.
Last we heard, this sister, the other Nikki has not been able to reach her. What's her name? Christina.
Yes.
Yeah. So Christina, who also goes by the last name of either Wasilishin or there were 2 more names. What were they?
Literal. One of them was literal. And I can't remember what the other one was right off.
It
but
was
yes.
the father's name. The one with the P.
Oh, Peterson.
Peterson.
Hey, Peterson.
Yes.
The last anyone had heard, this person she has not been able to find her. She states that the police has not been able to find her. I did my fun Facebook Google through, and I was not able to find her. I was able to find a little bit up to about 2019, and then I've not been able to find anything about her online since. So the sister who was 3, who went to live with her father, the person, the suspect, Russell, in this case, has not been heard of for a few years. We don't know how accurate that is. I'm just giving, I'm sorry. I don't know if she's avoiding her sister because she just doesn't want to talk to her sister. No offense meant there, because I have sisters and I don't want to talk to them. Trust me. But
no, Actually, can I jump in real quick there?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was recently watching a podcast, and it's about 9 months old, or the interview was about 8 or 9 months old, and Nikki did say that yes, her sister was missing, that the Sedona Police Department was looking for her. The last that I read, and the last that I saw, the last that I heard is that there was not a welfare check put into place, and there was not a request for location.
Mhm.
Put into place, in that partly because she didn't want to get multiple departments involved. However, here's the situation. We know that there was a falling out. She said that they were estranged during this interview. So there is a good possibility that her absence may be, especially if she went to live with the suspect, and that is the only parent that she knows from this point on, she might have completely removed herself from the situation just so she doesn't have to be the person to testify against her father.
From what I could find online, and this is just, I'm not a detective. I'm the person who I look up people on Facebook and try and find stuff.
Mhm.
And this is, please, please, please understand, this is no offense against this person.
No.
I did find a couple arrest records from 2013, I think 2015, something along those lines. There were some drug offenses on there, and I think 2019 was her last Facebook post. She has not posted on Instagram since. There is no, with her actual name or any of those last names, there's no online that I can find, but that doesn't mean that she's not out there and she's gotten better. She's decided to remove herself from the situation. It could
We
go
don't know.
very many different ways. It could be
Yeah.
she's a lawyer on Wall Street. I don't know. Or it could, she may be incarcerated currently. She may not be alive anymore. But either way, her sister's looking for her. So if anyone does know of where she is,
Please
please do
You-
reach out.
And here is the bottom line. This is a horrible situation. Because at this point, we have given the case file to Geek Gumshoe and said, please look at it like you would if you were taking on a case being handed over from another department, and read over everything that you have, and from your perspective, how would you handle this case? What is your thoughts on what you're looking at? And that's what he has given us. Now, whether or not that is 100% accurate, as he said, he would love to have somebody come in and tell him, prove him wrong on this, if that's available. But here's what breaks my heart about this entire situation, and quite honestly, my heart goes out to Nikki and to Christina, because they lost their mother at a very young age. You have two young women, and I know all of us here, we have incredible relationships with our mothers. We have incredible relationships with our children. And it's just, that is one of those things that you can never find a supplement for. You can never recreate. And it just breaks my heart. And I understand, even if it was an accident and it was my mother, I would want that person to go to jail. Personally, I would find everything possible to say about this person and say it was his fault. Even if it was accidental. Here's the thing. Even if he did accidentally shoot her, it was still his fault. He shot her. And me, as a child of that, I would want him to go to jail. So I can 100% sympathize with her. And it breaks my heart to no end.
The thing that I always have to stand on when it comes to cases like this is that there is a tremendous difference between justice and retribution. And a lot of people ask for justice, but what they really want is retribution. Retribution is justice that's vetted out by your hand and your standard, not by the standards of society. And so that's what we have to keep in mind with something like this, is that just because you don't like the outcome of it, it doesn't mean that justice wasn't served. It just means that you didn't get it in the brand that you liked. And sometimes it's hard to meet that expectation, especially when you're talking about family. You know, you're talking about somebody who, you know, there's a girl out there that was raised by a man that has been accused of murder for 30 years.
Murdering
There's
her
another
mother.
girl whose mother was taken away from her 30 years ago, who very firmly believes that it was her sister's father who did it, and it was a deliberate act.
Mhm.
And I think that there's somewhere in the middle is the truth, and that if you want to hear the truth, if you want to accept that it's something other than what you want it to be, then you can probably find some peace in that. But otherwise, you're probably not going to get that. You're going to get angry. You're not going to like the solution, because it's not the narrative that you've been trying to project and that you've led yourself to believe. And I really hope that that Nikki is willing to listen to some alternate possibilities of what went down. That maybe it wasn't something where somebody just wanted her mother dead. Maybe it was something where just a whole lot of bad elements came together and, you know, resulted in that incident.
I suppose at the end of the day, no matter what happens from now on, the damage is done.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You have two
Well-
girls that have lost their mother, and you have
Yep.
one that is living with the supposed killer, or
Missing
that would,
with
you
the
know,
supposed killer.
well, who grew up with them. And I mean,
Nothing changes.
there's nothing will nothing changes, and it's been going on for 30 years. And as she said, her mother was doing the research and putting the notes together. Her aunt also did the research and put the notes together, and tried to get somewhere with this, and now she's taken on that mantle. And you know, she's hoping that it doesn't go to a fourth generation, that there is some resolution. And you know, all I can say is I hope that there's some element of peace that can be found for this family, because this is
Agreed.
it was a roller coaster for me. I know, you know, part of the reason we were wanting to discuss it so much is because it was a roller coaster ride. There were so many different emotions from the moment we started reading and we started following all the information. And then, you know, with all of the other possibilities of what you were seeing in print and what things meant, it's just, it's an emotional wreck. You can't
is.
come out of this. Yeah.
It absolutely is. And it's difficult not, especially as like a mother,
Mhm.
it's difficult not to hear this case and be like, what the F? Like,
Yeah.
it is so hard to listen to this case and imagine, what would I do if that were my mom? If that were I would go through hell. I don't care. If someone murdered, my mom is like a firecracker. Yeah, you know my mom a bit. You know my
Yeah.
mom a bit. You'll meet her eventually. She's fun. But my mom is a firecracker. And if it came down to some drama, my mom would not hesitate to pull a gun on someone and
No.
demand her right of stuff. That would be my mom. And you know what? If someone fought her on some crap and she ended up dead, I would go through hell to make sure that that person paid for it.
We would want retribution if
Yeah,
somebody were
absolutely.
to kill. Absolutely. At that point, me personally, if you were to, I mean, I'm dealing with a situation right now that I'm just like, retribution sounds a lot better than justice.
We probably better not put that out on the internet, though.
None of us know you're talking about my mother, right? My
Right,
mother,
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's probably time we're past the hour. Wow, look at the
Oh,
time.
look at that. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Look at that.
Close out that show.
And with that said, oh my God, can I hide in the goat? Oh my God. Did I just say that live? With that
It's
said,
about my mom. It's fine. She'll
it's
laugh.
about your
great.
mom.
Say it.
Fuck
Say it.
screams. Let's go away. Let's stop this now.